Good evening. In the news tonight, Israeli forces raid Al-Aqsa compound in occupied Jerusalem following Friday prayers and fire stun grenades at worshippers, injuring at least 30. Iraq's most senior Shiite Muslim cleric urges followers to take up arms and unite to fight militants from ISIL against their advance. And U.S. President says no troops to Iraq, but other options are being considered. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry joins Hollywood actress Angelina Jolie and British Foreign Secretary William Hague in calling for action to end use of rape as weapon of war. Good evening again and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Clashes broke out at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem between Palestinian worshippers and occupation forces. Following Friday prayers, Israeli forces raided the compound and fired stun grenades in what they claim was a retaliation for stones thrown by worshippers. An Israeli police spokesperson said around 20 Palestinians threw stones at police officers guarding one of the gates to the site, and police dispersed them using stun grenades. At least 30 people were injured. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs said it is following up on conditions of Jordanians in Iraq. In a statement today, Ministry spokesperson Sabah al-Rafi'i urged Jordanians to contact the Ministry's Operations Center, the Jordanian Embassy in Baghdad, and the Consulate General in Erbil when necessary, noting that no incidents have been reported. The spokesperson also called upon the Jordanian community in Iraq to exercise utmost caution and stay clear of potential spots of clashes and places of assembly because of the current conditions. Over to Iraq, and militants from the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant ISIL captured 2 more Iraqi towns overnight in a relentless sweep south towards the capital, Baghdad. In the spreading chaos, Iraqi Kurdish forces seized control of Kirkuk as Iraqi government troops abandoned posts in panic over ISIL's advance. Thrusting further to the southeast after their lightning seizure of the major Iraqi city of Mosul in the north, ISIL entered 2 towns in Diyala province. Saadiya and Jalawla had fallen to the insurgents after government troops fled their positions, along with several villages around the Himreen mountains that have long been a hideout for militants. Iraq's most senior Shiite Muslim cleric urged followers to take up arms and unite to fight back against advances by militants from ISIL. In a message, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani said people who are capable of carrying arms and fighting the terrorists in defense of their country should volunteer to join the security forces to achieve this sacred goal. More than 1,000 recruits from the southern Iraqi province of Karbala headed to Baghdad to reinforce Iraqi forces in their fight against advancing Sunni Islamist militants. The recruits are the second batch to leave Karbala over the past 2 days, heading to the army camp of Taji, where they will be enrolled in a 1-day training course before being sent to fight alongside the regular army. U.S. President Barack Obama said he will take several days to review options for how the United States can help Iraq deal with the militant insurgency, saying any action would need significant involvement by Iraq itself. Obama made clear that American troops would not be dispatched to Iraq to quell the insurgency and that the Iraqi government would have to fight for themselves.
Will not be sending U.S. troops back into combat in Iraq, but I have asked my national security team to prepare a range of other options that could help support Iraq security forces, and I'll be reviewing those options in the days ahead. So, any action that we may take to provide assistance to Iraqi security forces has to be joined by a serious and sincere effort by Iraq's leaders to set aside sectarian differences, to promote stability, and account for the legitimate interests of all of Iraq's communities, and to continue to build the capacity of an effective security force. We can't do it for them.
He said threats by militants from ISIL in Iraq poses a danger to the people of Iraq and also potentially Americans.
Over the last several days, we've seen significant gains made by ISIL, a terrorist organization that operates in both Iraq and in Syria. In the face of a terrorist offensive, Iraqi security forces have proven unable to defend a number of cities, which has allowed the terrorists to overrun a part of Iraq's territory. And this poses a danger to Iraq and its people, and given the nature of these terrorists, it could pose a threat eventually to American interests as well.
Obama said the insurgency so far has not caused major disruptions to oil supplies from Iraq, but added that if insurgents took control of refineries, other oil producers in the Middle East would need to help pick up the slack. He concluded by saying that will be part of the consultations that will be taking place during the course of this week. Meanwhile, in Geneva, UN human rights spokesman said that hundreds of people were killed, many of them executed, after militants overran the Iraqi city of Mosul this week. Rupert Colville said Iraqi government forces had stopped people at checkpoints and prevented them fleeing Mosul as ISIL militants took it over. But now militants were using their own checkpoints to hunt down anyone associated with the Iraqi government. He said that reports received by the UN mission in Iraq suggest that the number of people killed in recent days may run into the hundreds, and the number of wounded is said to be approaching 1,000. Colville added that the prisoners released by militants from Mosul prison had been looking to exact revenge on those responsible for their incarceration, and some went to Tikrit and killed 7 former prison officers.
Had reports of suggesting the government forces have also committed excesses, in particular the shelling of civilian areas during the fighting on the 6th and 8th of June in Mosul, resulting in a large number of civilian casualties. There are claims that up to 30 civilians may have been killed during this shelling. We've also received reports that government forces were at one point not allowing civilians to leave from Mosul as they were trying to do so, and that people were actually even being turned back from checkpoints on the outskirts of the city.
The advance of the militants in Iraq leaves Turkey facing a widening Islamist insurgency in 2 of its southern neighbors. Militants from the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant in northern Iraq have seized 80 Turks in the city of Mosul over the past 2 days. Turkey is negotiating for the release of the hostages, who include special forces soldiers, diplomats and children, and has confirmed they are unharmed. Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey is holding talks for all the citizens taken hostage and have mobilized all efforts to bring them home. The Ukrainian flag fluttered over the regional headquarters of Mariupol after government forces reclaimed the port city from pro-Russian separatists in heavy fighting and said they had regained control of a long stretch of the border with Russia. Government forces stormed the rebels after they were surrounded and given 10 minutes to surrender. At least 5 separatists and 2 servicemen were killed in the battle. The advances are significant victories for the Ukraine leadership in a military operation to crush the armed rebellion. Mariupol is strategically important because it lies on major roads from the southeastern border with Russia into the rest of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk ordered the energy sector to prepare for Russian gas cuts from Monday after Moscow and Kyiv failed to resolve their differences over gas prices. Moscow set Monday, June 16, as a deadline for Ukraine to pay off part of its gas debt of $1.95 billion. Yatsenyuk also ordered the national regulator to revise transportation tariffs for Russian gas via Ukraine. Russia ships around a half of its gas export to Europe through Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry joined Hollywood actress Angelina Jolie and British Foreign Secretary William Hague to call for an end to sexual violence on the final day of a London summit on the issue. At the closing plenary of the summit, Kerry said that sexual violence should be banished to the dark ages and the history books where it belongs. He called on governments to end a culture of impunity regarding rape in conflict zones, for perpetrators to be brought to justice, and for support for survivors. His appeal was echoed by Jolie and Hague, who co-hosted the 3-day summit. The U.S. top diplomat paid tribute to civil rights champion, author and poet Maya Angelou, who died in May, by reciting excerpts of her poem, I Still Rise.
As Maya exhorted us, we came here to send a message: we rise, we rise, we rise. we will go out of here and do the work to end this scourge of sexual violence. Let's get the job done.
We've tolerated, and we still do tolerate, violence and discrimination against women in many forms in all quarters of the world. And women still do not occupy their rightful place in the economics and diplomacy and government of many nations. And I'm saddened that women's groups still have to ask to be included at the negotiating table.
We can never again plead ignorance. We know what is at stake, and we must work to end impunity in those conflicts now. For this to happen, war zone rape must remain at the top of the international agenda, at the Security Council, in regional bodies, and in the foreign policy of each of the countries gathered here today.
And back here at home, the General Secondary Education Certificate Tawjihi summer session exam starts tomorrow. The Ministry of Education said 126,773 students will sit for the exam, which runs until June 29. The Ministry of Education said all preparations have concluded to ensure a smooth session, adding that the number of schools hosting the exam stands at 422. A total of 13,000 teachers will monitor the exam, while 18,566 others will correct the papers. U.S. Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, who spent 5 years as a Taliban prisoner of war, landed in the United States at an Air Force base in San Antonio, Texas. Bergdahl was handed over to U.S. forces in Afghanistan in exchange for 5 Taliban leaders held at Guantanamo prison in Cuba. The sergeant will have additional care at the Army Medical Center, known as the San Antonio Military Medical Center, which has teams of specialists and has been helping returning prisoners of war for decades. Military officials have said Bergdahl did not immediately contact his parents after his release, but could do so whenever he was emotionally ready. On Wednesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel acknowledged at a congressional hearing that the swap deal was messy and imperfect, but defended the administration's decision to go ahead with it. Thousands of diners attended the annual White Dinner in White on Paris's River Seine. Now, in its 26th year, the dinner was held on the Pont Alexandre III and Pont de la Concorde, among other bridges, with only a select group of people allowed to participate. Tables tried to outdo each other with their decorations, with some even decorated with orchids, white roses, candles on crisp white tablecloths. Food brought by guests included foie gras, smoked salmon, and macaroons. Later in the evening, guests began to dance and lit sparkles, which dazzled underneath in the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower. We go to the World Cup games. Mexico overcame the setback of having 2 early goals harshly disallowed to beat Cameroon 1-0 in their World Cup opener. The Mexicans had 2 Giovanni Dos Santos efforts controversially disallowed in the first half. By halftime, they were goalless, but kept on dominating in the relentless rain until the 61st minute, when again a Dos Santos shot was parried by the keeper into the path of Oribe Peralta, who tucked it in. Mexico now joins Brazil at the top of the World Cup Group A with 3 points. Last night, Neymar wasted little time in living up to his billing as Brazil's World Cup spearhead when he scored 2 goals to lead the host nation to a 3-1 comeback victory over Croatia in the opening game of the tournament. Brazil had fallen behind in the 11th minute when Marcelo diverted a low cross into his own net as Croatia played some neat attacking football. But Brazil leveled after 29 minutes when Neymar marked his 50th appearance by squeezing a shot from the edge of the box just inside the post. The hosts gradually took control of the Group A game after the break when Neymar converted a controversial 71-minute penalty. Brazil finished on a high when Oscar poked home the third goal in stoppage time to start a party their fans hope will end with victory in the final. And finally, fair weather tonight in most regions with partly cloudy skies and northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, whereby it will be warm in most parts of the kingdom with northwesterly moderate to fresh winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect warm conditions tonight but hot tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Israeli forces raid Al-Aqsa compound in occupied Jerusalem following Friday prayers and fire stun grenades at worshippers, injuring at least 30. Iraq's most senior Shiite Muslim cleric urges followers to take up arms and unite to fight militants from ISIL against their advance. And the U.S. president says no troops to Iraq, but other options are being considered. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry joins Hollywood actress Angelina Jolie and British Foreign Secretary William Hague in calling for action to end use of rape as weapon of war. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.